Oh my God, Rob Core. Okay, so check this out. This story is called The Brave and the Mold. Like, if that gives you any indication of what it's about, and I swear to God, this story is hilarious. It's like the best thing coming out of DC Rebirth right now. Like, it's absolutely one of my favorite stories with Batman. Now, here's the funny thing. This has Swamp Thing, and like, I've never read Swamp Thing. I'm a little ashamed to admit it. I have never read Swamp Thing once in my life. Like, I've never read a single comic of his. I heard that like the new 52 Swamp Thing is really, really good, but I've never read it before. And it's kind of weird because he's like a pop culture mainstay, right? Like most everybody knows what's going on, like who Swamp Thing is when they see him, but like I've never read anything about him. So this is like my first real exposure in comics to his character, and it's amazing. So here's a cool thing. So initially this picks up, I mean, technically it's kind of like chapter 2. They kind of split into chapters like the old anthology books from the 1940s and 50s and 60s, where you would have like a singular book that would go on for 30 pages, but you would have like part 1, which would be like 4 pages, a part 2 might be 6 pages, or chapter 1, chapter 2, something along those lines. But all that really happens here is just like some guy in an apartment is shot in the head, and he's kind of singing this really haunting song. This is actually picked up on by Jim Gordon and Batman. Now, this is where things get hilarious, because with the character of Swamp Thing, from what I've read and from what I understand, he's tied into something called the Green, and that I'm pretty familiar with just because of the whole Injustice stories. But the way it works, as far as I'm aware, the way it originally worked is Swamp Thing was just kind of like this outlier in DC Comics. He was just kind of out there in no man's land, like Hellblazer in the Vertigo stories. He was just kind of out there by himself, and he really wasn't tied into like the rest of DC. But with the new 52, DC rolled him into the shared universe. And what they did is they came up with an idea called the Green. And what they basically said was that in the realm of DC's landscape, you've got the green, which is plant life, you've got the red, which is animals, you've got the black, which is rot. It was almost kind of like this Earth-based equivalent to like the emotional spectrum from the Green Lantern mythos. But the fact remains that Swamp Thing is tied to the green, much like Poison Ivy. And so what this means is that he is effectively immortal. I mean, as long as plant life exists, he will exist. And he can literally just kind of like reconstitute himself, take on additional mass. He has strength of a level that's never been calculated before. He's incredibly capable in terms of what it is that he can do. But that's about the extent of my knowledge on his character. After reading this story, I'm almost inclined to go back and read the new 52 Swamp Thing just to see if it was really that good. I have no idea how long it went on for. I can't imagine it went on too long. 52 issues is what everything ran for in the new 52 because they were all monthly titles, so it's not like it was a super lengthy thing. But the fact remains here, the Swamp Thing basically just kind of reconstitutes himself or forms out of some plant matter and just kind of makes his presence known to Jim Gordon. Now, this is the funny thing because Batman knows who Swamp Thing is, right? So Batman's just kind of like looking at the crime scene and analyzing things, and Jim Gordon is just like, okay, like, this giant swamp monster just kind of emerged behind us, and I really feel like that needs to be said right now. Like, I really feel like we have to acknowledge that this happened, and it's just funny to see people reacting to this. And that's one of the things that I love about King's writing, is because he gives the characters so much character. Like, Jim Gordon is just this guy that's like, okay, look, I mean, I guess it was only a matter of time before something like this happened. We live in a world where bullets bounce off of a man because he's an alien. We've got a guy who flies around at night, or just like glides around at night, dressed as a bat, beating people up. It makes sense that there would be a giant guy who's composed of, plant matter appearing in the middle of a room in a crime scene. But it's kind of cool because while this is happening, Batman's just like, is there a problem? he's totally responding to Swamp Thing as if he's a normal person. Now from here, we switch over to Alfred, and this again is another funny scenario because Swamp Thing being composed, of compost, being a giant compost heap, is just kind of like leaving marks and stuff on the ground, leaving plant marks on the ground. Alfred cleans this kind of stuff up, but it's just like, yeah, it's all par for the course when you're Alfred. It's just kind of the way it goes. Messes get brought in by the giving tree, things just come in, messes get made, and that's really it. But again, it's one of these kind of cool things. Now, the interesting thing about this is that Tom King is so good at characters, and this is where the story really kind of starts to shift a bit towards the character development. And the reason why is because with Swamp Thing, there is no such thing as death, at least as far as he explains it here to Bruce Wayne. There is no such thing as death. A person comes from the earth, or they come from life evolution, however it is you want to look at it, they come from divine intervention, they die, so to speak, but they become one with the earth, and in turn, they feed plants and they feed trees, which provide life-giving oxygen or nourishment to different, critters and organisms across the world. And so there's always kind of like this cycle of life and death, so to speak, but no one's ever really dead. And that's what makes this so cool, is because in his mind, he basically says, look, this man who was killed is my father. He sent me letters, he tried to talk to me. I've spoke to him maybe once after the whole instance with the swamp where I became Swamp Thing, and that was really it. Like, this guy never really had a role in the life of Alec Holden. Instead, he was just kind of this guy that Alec knew about, but never really did anything with. Now, the reason why this matters, and the reason why this is so cool, is because what it does is it bridges the gap between Bruce Wayne and Swamp Thing. Swamp Thing is this guy where he's basically like, I have this man who's my father that I'll never be able to talk to anymore. I'll never be able to like converse with. I'll never be able to learn more about him. Not that I ever did know much about him in the first place, but now that I want to know about him, I can't because he's effectively gone. I'll never be able to speak to him in the conventional sense. You know, with Bruce Wayne, it's much the same way. His mother and father were killed in front of him. He'll never be able to talk to Thomas Wayne. He'll never be able to talk to Martha Wayne. He'll never be able to get their opinions, get their ideas, ask them, do I make you proud? That's one of the most significant moments about the button. That's why the encounter between Thomas Wayne from the Flashpoint universe and Bruce Wayne from the main DC universe was so significant, because even if it's not his biological father in the traditional sense, it's still his father. You know, it's still the Thomas Wayne that he knew, albeit just a different version of Thomas Wayne. And it was emotional, and it was visceral, and it was amazing. And so because of that, it creates some real emotional tie to these characters, if that kind of makes any sense. And so ultimately what ends up happening here is Swamp Thing basically says, look, I'm just kind of here because I'm interested in solving this murder. And that really kind of seems to be it. I mean, it's like, look, my dad was killed. I want to know what's going on. Now, the initial indication here from Bruce Wayne is that this man was murdered on like the 84th floor of a building. And there's only a handful of people who could have been the ones responsible for that. Now, the first one he goes after is Kite Man. And Kite Man, dude, Kite Man is amazing. Kite Man's so cool. All this guy does is fly around and yell, Kite Man, hell yeah, that's all he does. Like, that's his thing. That's his whole ordeal. Now, of course, the cool thing about this is that Tom King very much plays on the idea of like what Batman's about, right? Like, we know as the Batman is the guy who doesn't kill, but the bad guys don't need to know that. The bad guys just need to believe they're gonna die. And if you're Kite Man and you're soaring 500 feet above the ground and Batman latches onto you and will not let you go, the only thing racing through your mind is you're going to smash into the ground and Batman's gonna let you die. He's gonna bail out, you know, a second before it happens. He's gonna live, but Kite Man's gonna be done with all his living. And so it's kind of cool because, I mean, we know this is not gonna happen. We know he's not gonna die, but the questions that Batman has is, you know, who is it that committed this crime, or how would they have gained access to the resources necessary to commit this crime? Because Kite Man didn't invent his own stuff. He got his stuff from somewhere else. And so again, it's really kind of like one of these whodunit mystery sort of things. And so what Catman basically says is that he grabbed his stuff from a guy named Mooney Money. Now, of course, Mooney Money is clearly a comic book stand-in for Guy Fieri, but the fact remains here that going through all these different sources and jumping through all these different guys, eventually Batman, you know, basically realizes that this murder seems to have been done by a guy by the name of Headhunter. Now, Headhunter is a guy that I know nothing about. I don't know if he's new. I don't know if he is a character that was recently created. I really don't like using Wikipedias just because anybody can edit them, but I don't know anything about that guy. But really, the only explanation we need is what's offered here, where he's basically just like a mercenary, and he always executes his victims by shooting them twice in the head, and no one knows why he shoots a second time. But the funny thing about this is that Bruce Wayne kind of hints at this and says, look, this guy's going to be hard to find because he basically commits his crimes. He goes underground, he goes on the run, and then he only resurfaces whenever he's ready to commit another murder. And so the guy is sporadic. I mean, he pops up here, he pops up there, but there's no pattern to what it is that he does outside of the murders that he commits. And so it's really kind of a cool scenario, because what this shows us is that even within the realm of Gotham City, or even the world as a whole, there are some people out there who are just that good at evading Batman. They're just that good at evading him. And again, it makes Bruce Wayne more realistic. It makes him more grounded. It makes him more tangible, and basically telling us that despite all of his vaunted resources, all of his wealth, all of his capabilities, at the end of the day, he is still only human, and he can only do what a normal human can do. And so because of this, Swamp Thing basically chimes in and says he's currently entering the Gotham Museum of Art. And when Batman's like, how did you find that out? Swamp Thing's response is that the grass told him. And that's the coolest thing about this, because Batman's like, all right, look, man, the grass, all right, if you're talking to the grass, that's cool, whatever, man. Do what you do, man. You be you, I'll be me, and we'll call it a day. And so it's just really kind of funny to see these interactions between these characters who would normally never meet, because they're so starkly different, right? I mean, Batman is hanging out with plant matter as they're going to investigate a murder. And so again, it's interesting to kind of see how these characters relate to one another, how they deal with one another. Now, of course, once they get to the Gotham Museum, they immediately encounter Headhunter, and Headhunter really just kind of starts talking talking about how he had killed this guy, he had killed the father of Swamp Thing, just because of the fact that he was sort of bragging about how he knows heroes, or he has an in with superheroes, so to speak, only insofar that he knew his son was Swamp Thing, and that was really about it. But it was one of these scenarios where it was this situation where a guy was basically spouting off of the mouth in the wrong place at the wrong time, and Headhunter effectively killed him, basically killed him for that purpose. Now, in response to this, Swamp Thing immediately kills Headhunter. Like, he just immediately crushes him, and Batman's kind of begging him to stop the whole time. But as soon as he's done, Swamp Thing starts crying and basically talking about how his father's dead, he's never going to be able to talk to his father again. Batman's immediate response is like, what happened to, like, there is no death? What happened to, like, everything lives on, to, like, light descending and all that stuff? Like, what happened to that? And Swamp Thing's like, no, man. He's just dead. That's basically what it is. And Batman's so pissed. Like, Batman reads in the riot act. He is so pissed off because in the mind of Batman, Swamp Thing used him, right? Like, Swamp Thing shows up with this whole dog and pony show of, oh, well, nothing's ever really dead. Everything just kind of lives on, in the form of plant life and different things like that, but it's basically him just kind of turncoating here and just being like, that's it, man. Everything's dead. There's nothing to it, man. Like, you die and then that's it. Like, that's just the end of you, and it's kind of crazy because while Batman's reading him the riot act, Swamp Thing's like, I gotta go. And he basically just bails out. And that's it. And it really just kind of ends with Batman screaming at him. And that's pretty much all there is to it. It is an amazing story. This is so good. It is a perfect ending to a Batman story. And I really hope, this question goes out to you guys who are Swamp Thing fans. My question is this: is the new 52 Swamp Thing like this? Or is it just like kind of weird and dark and so on? Because this is an amazing story. And I absolutely love this. I love seeing Batman reading Swamp Thing the riot act, because like Swamp Thing could crush him like a bug, right? Like Swamp Thing would be like, you know what? I'm tired of you, Batman. And then that's just the end of Bruce Wayne. It'd be so cool. Like, it's such a cool scenario to see Batman just not caring and just screaming at Swamp Thing, and then Swamp Thing just being like, I'm out, peace, and then just bailing. It's just kind of a funny scenario. But anyway, guys, I thought this was like a really cool one-off story, just kind of a, a one-shot that I thought was pretty interesting. But if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.